Hello everybody. I'm bringing you a noisy video today. I have the windows open, the fan is on, the door is open. You might hear the bird, you might hear the cats. I'm not sure, but I apologize in advance. We just finished up, today's Friday, we just finished up the live doing clues 11 and 12 of the mystery quilt. Are you following along? Isn't it turning out so pretty? I absolutely love this quilt. And it's coming together really nicely. Like, we are really far into it now. It's never too late to catch up. Check out my channel if you're interested. Anyway, it's been a few minutes since I recorded a video for you today, but I have one for you. Today we're going to be making the mini quilt from the pattern that I designed called Spring Greetings. I keep saying Spring Gatherings, but it's not. Spring Greetings. Cute little bunny quilt. But today's video is really going to focus on making the top of this quilt because there's some piecework at the bottom where we're going to make some hourglass blocks. So I'm going to walk you through that and then walk you through the applique portion of how I stitch down my applique. And I'm going to also bring you over to Canvas Workspace. For those of you who have gotten scan and cut machines recently, or maybe you've gotten them and you haven't taken them out of the box yet, or maybe you've had your machine and you've worked with it some, but you just need a refresher, right? I'm going to open up the SVG file in Canvas Workspace and show you how I arrange and work with so many different pieces. I mean, this applique has quite a few pieces. There we go. Quite a few little pieces to arrange, right? I'm going to show you how I arrange it all on one mat. Cut it all out at the same time. And then I have a tip for those of you who are working with brand new mats. I'm so used to working with a mat that is old. It does not have hardly any stick at all. My new scan and cut mats, today I'm going to use the fabric mat, is hecka sticky. Like, it is just ridiculously sticky. And so I'm going to share a tip on how to take away some of that stick, but you'll see, it still was not enough and my heat and bond stuck to the mat. So my main tip for this video, you might say, is how to take off that paper really quickly without scraping for hours. And it revives your mat like brand new. Hecka sticky back again, right? You won't believe how easy it is and what I use, so stay tuned. All right, everybody, the link for this pattern is down in the description box. If you're on Patreon, you'll go to Patreon and get your pattern there. You ready to get started? Come on, let's go. Today we're going to get started with this mini quilt using the 3 squares of fabric that the pattern calls for. You'll notice there's a light, a medium, and a dark. And I'm going to stack these 3 squares on top of one another, and I'm going to cut them twice on the diagonal going in both directions. That's going to give me 4 triangles of each one of these fabrics. These are actually going to make up the 2 hourglass blocks at the bottom of our mini quilt. So once you have your little triangles, you can go ahead and arrange them in any which colorway that you like. You will have 4 little triangles left over once you're done arranging your hourglass blocks. To sew them, I'm going to flip the right side over and mark my little seams so I don't get confused moving these over to the sewing machine. We're going to be sewing these seams first. Using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, make sure to line everything up nice and straight. And we're going to sew these 4 seams first. The little mark in the seam allowance helps me make sure I'm sewing the right seam. And then I'll bring these over and open up those seams and give them a good press before moving on. Once we get these seams pressed open, I'll flip these little pieces over and press them one more time from the front side. And then we can line these blocks back up again. And we have 1 more seam on each one of these blocks to complete the hourglass block. We're going to match up that very middle seam right there in the middle. and bring these over to the sewing machine, and we're sewing these two seams also with your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now be careful because these triangles can stretch because they're cut on the bias, right? They're a little stretchy. Just be mindful that you're not stretching your little triangles and making them wonky. Those two seams there will complete the 2 hourglass blocks at the bottom of our mini quilt. So I'll just pop those seams open on the back and give these 2 blocks a press. You can absolutely press your seams over to one side and nest your middle seam in each one of your 2 blocks if you like. One thing I like about opening up these seams is that these blocks tend to lay a lot flatter if you press the seams open. Now the awesome thing about making these 2 hourglass blocks are they finish at the correct size, so you don't have to square them up, but I will take my little rotary knife and remove all of the little dog ears. So there's my 2 hourglass blocks. We're going to go ahead and piece these together right there with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press that seam open. So there's the bottom of our quilt, right? The back is just as pretty, don't you think? And then we're going to bring in the section that goes right above it, and then the very main body of our quilt. So our quilt top lays out just like this, and we have 2 seams right there that join it together. You'll join those with a 1/4 inch seam allowance too, and press those seams open. So there's the back of my quilt, and everything lays nice and flat. Once you're done putting together the top of your quilt, that was really quick, right? We're ready for the applique portion. So just like any other applique that I do in my patterns, you don't have to have a scan and cut. And on this one, you could print directly on heat and bond or freezer paper, just this sheet, and not have to trace your pieces if you like. I'm going to use my scan and cut, and so I'm going to bring you over to Canvas Workspace, and I'm going to open up the SVG file. That's the cutting file that comes with this pattern. All of your pieces for the applique are grouped together in this one file. So I'm just going to import the one file, and it should open up and you'll see all the pieces right there. Now, of course, I like to organize all my pieces, so I'm going to start moving some things around, right? I'm just going to use this whole screen as sort of my desktop and arrange my pieces. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm going to start bringing over and grouping together all the pieces that I want to cut from the same fabric. So I know the big ear pieces, the head, the arms, and the feet, I want to cut from one particular white fabric. The body or the jumpsuit, the clothing of the bunny, I'm going to cut out of a different fabric, and the flowers I'm going to cut with the same fabric. So I'm just grouping and moving things around here on my mat so that I can cut all of these pieces out from different fabric swatches all at the same time. You'll see that I group things together so that if I move them in the machine, all the pieces move at the same time. I even rotate my pieces sometimes, and once I get them all together, I'm going to group them. Now when I group them, I want you to pay attention to this number right down here where my mouse is. See that? When you group multiple objects together, it shows you how big that patch is going to be. So I increase that number by about 1/2 inch, and that's how big I know how big to cut my fabric for the mat, so that I know my fabric's going to be big enough, right? So I arrange everything on the mat and space it out, and then send it over to my scan and cut. Now today I'm going to be using Heat and Bond Light on the back of my fabrics, and you'll see I took a little note of how big the fabric patches need to be for each one of those different sections of applique. And now I'm just going to do rough cuts of my Heat and Bond, and I'll mark what each one of these little patches of Heat and Bond are going to go to. Like I have a flowers, the clothing, the bunny parts, the middle ear part of the bunny, the eyes, the middles of the flower. I like to cut my heat and bond first. And I thought it'd be good to show you this because if you're extremely new with working with cutting applique with your cutting machine, even if it's like a silhouette or a Cricut, you kind of wonder like the whole process, right? So this is my work in progress. So once I have all my heat and bond cut, now I'm going to go through and do a rough cut of each one of my fabrics. Now my fabrics I like to cut just a little bit bigger than the heat and bond because I don't want any heat and bond to stick over the edge of that fabric when I'm pressing, right? I don't want the heat and bond to stick to my pressing mat. So I cut my fabric just a tiny bit bigger. And you'll see that, see? And then I will take all these pieces over and give them a press according to the directions on the heat and bond package. And when I'm done, this is me bringing them back, and see that little extra bit of fabric? At this point, I'm going to trim those extra bits off. The reason I do that is it eliminates a little bit of space on the mat. And if I'm positioning my applique over the fabric, I want to make sure that the heat and bond is on all of the fabric, and I won't have a section of applique that's missing some heat and bond, right? I hope that makes some sense. So here is my brand new fabric mat for my brand new scan and cut. It is heck of a sticky. Hear that? Now listen when I touch this mat. See that? See how it just sticks to my hand and pulls up? That is so sticky. So one of the things I like to do with my brand new mats is I'll bring in a piece of extra leftover batting, right? This is just some warm and natural batting left over from some quilt projects, and I just stick it to my mat several times. What it's going to do is the mat's going to pick off lots of little lint pieces, and you might not even see them, right? But it's going to take off a lot of lint from the batting and make the mat a lot less sticky. Now you'll see in a few minutes, I probably should have done it a couple more times because even though this mat is way less stickier, it's still super sticky. And my heat and bond's going to stick to this mat like crazy. And you'll see that here in a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and arrange each one of these patches right on my mat. I still have the heat and bond stuck to the back side of my fabric swatches. I'm just going to press down each one of these fabric pieces, and sadly I did not film. I thought I did. I had the camera over there, but I forgot to hit record, and it didn't film the machine actually cutting each one of these applique pieces. But here we are, they're all cut like magic. Each one of them is perfectly cut. And I'm going to take them off of the heat and bond paper, and you'll see that paper is just sticking right to that mat. But all the applique pieces just come right off. But see this paper? How many times have you used a brand new mat and you're in this same predicament? Next time, go grab your bottle of Windex. It is a lifesaver, a time saver. You can be very generous with your Windex and just squirt this mat like crazy. Squirt all that paper, and you will see immediately you'll be able to just start scooting that paper right off of the mat. Now I am going to speed this up just so we can get through today's video and this whole entire project. But this is me, just like as soon as I sprayed it, I was able to just start scooting that paper right off. And I wish I would have known this a long time ago, because I have spent long amounts of time when I got my first scan and cut scraping paper off of my mats. But this just takes away all of that time and makes it pretty effortless. And all you have to really do is just let it sit there and air dry, right? I'm going to take a baby wipe and just finish drying off this mat a little bit. And then I'm going to let it just sit there for about 5 or 10 minutes and air dry. And when I do, here we are, like magic. The mat's dry, and listen. There's the original stick right back to the mat. So yeah, the Windex works great and does not remove the stickiness from your mat. So give that a try the next time some paper sticks to your mat. Alright, so we have all of our applique pieces. I'm so sorry that I forgot to hit record when it was going through the machine. But here we are with our pieces, and we can start arranging the applique. The little flowers fit in that border between the hourglass blocks and the main part of the body of this quilt. So I'm going to fuse those in place first. Isn't that so cute? And then we can arrange the body of the bunny. And I think the most important part of arranging the applique portions of this quilt is to remember we have a binding that's going to come over the edges of our quilt about a quarter, little maybe quarter of an inch over top of this top of the quilt. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to cover up your applique with your binding. So just fusing all of my pieces in place. There we are. Isn't that so cute? Now what's really great about this little mini quilt is all of the negative space, the empty space around the bunny, right? So on mine, I'm going to use the spring greetings writing that's in the pattern. And I'm going to use my light pad to trace that exactly where I want it. And with the heat erasing pen, I'm just going to trace that. You could use a fabric marker. You could, maybe you have a saying in your embroidery machine. Maybe you want to do some embroidery in this space. Maybe you wanted to say something completely different, right? Look at all that space. But I'm going to do some hand sewing because it's been a little while since I used my frame. And for my words, I'm going to use a simple little back stitch with some pearl cotton and a size 24 chenille needle. And I've gotten pretty quick at doing the back stitch. And so I would say it took me about an hour and a half to stitch out these two words on the mini quilt. I would just sat at my desk and listened to some YouTube videos while I did the hand stitching. But yeah, you could use a fabric marker, which is permanent. You could use the micron pins. Those are permanent. Or you could just eliminate the words altogether, right? You could do some more flowers in that space. Wouldn't that be pretty? The awesome thing about this is you could eliminate the applique and the words altogether and make up your own applique and retheme this whole entire mini quilt, but use the base part of the pattern and change it up. Now I'm not going to walk you through the whole entire thing of me stitching, but I did want to bring you along and just show you a glimpse of how I put the words onto my little mini quilt. I will say I am getting faster, even though it's been a little bit of time since I've done some hand stitching because of our move and packing. But this made for a good hour and a half in my day. So I'll finish stitching that off camera and we will come back to layer this project. So once you have your quilt top completely done, we're going to layer the project with the quilt back with the right side facing down, right? And then we're going to bring in the batting. And you know me, here's my glue stick. I'm going to base these layers together. We'll just dry that glue real quick before moving on. Then we're we're going to flip it back over and we're going to put the top of our quilt right in the middle. And of course I'm going to glue base that as well. I'm going to keep the quilting pretty simple on this quilt. And I do think I'm going to quilt it and stitch down my applique all at the same time. So you'll notice my applique does not have any stitches yet. And you could do the stitching on your applique before creating the layers like you see here. Or like me, you can create the layers and then stitch down your applique. And that could be your quilting for this project. So you'll see I'm going to go through and just do some really easy straight line quilting right next to the seams of that little flower border and right next to the seams of the hourglass block. And that'll be the main part of my quilting. Very simple, very basic, and very easy. I do think there's all kinds of fun quilting that you could do in those spaces, though, don't you? And then I'm going to stitch down my applique, and that's going to serve as my quilting as well. So I'm going to use a really small blanket stitch. I did not write down the settings for this blanket stitch, but you'll see that I did do a little test to make sure that it was small enough before I actually started sewing down my bunny. And I started with the outside portion of the ears and then transitioned right into stitching down the bunny's head. You'll see I skip around quite a bit. I like to, most of the time if I can, start with applique pieces that are on the lowest level. Like we have some layering going on. The feet are underneath of the clothing. So I stitch down the feet before the clothing. Whenever possible, I like to start at the lowest level and work my way up. And I have sped this up quite a bit just so that we're not here for 5 hours while I make this project. But I did want to walk you through the whole progression because I think, well, for this project, I'd have a hard time picking out which was my favorite part. Usually it's right now, stitching down the applique. That's usually my favorite part. But today I got to use my new Scan and Cut for my first project. And so for this particular video, I would say that's my favorite part. Even scraping off all that paper, it was kind of fun. Then you'll see I'm going to go back and stitch down the inner ears with the same little blanket stitch. And then I'm going to switch over to a free motion foot and I'm going to stitch down my flowers. Now all of the applique, feel free to switch out whatever stitches you want to use for your applique. Y'all know me, you know I love a blanket stitch, and you know I love a free motion stitch. So we're going to switch over that foot to the free motion foot. And just to let you know, I only get through stitching the first flower, and then my phone battery went kaput. So you don't get to see all the flowers stitched. Can y'all tell I'm a little out of practice in recording videos? But I do get to stitch this very first flower with you, and I'm just doing a straight stitch on the inside of that flower and then around the petals, all continuously. And unfortunately, after I stitched this flower, the battery died. So we're going to pick back up when I am ready to trim the batting and backing off of this quilt. So once I finished quilting the other 3 flowers, I did the same exact quilting on the other 3 flowers, and then I just did a little free motion nose instead of cutting the small little applique for the nose. This is my quilt, and we're ready to trim away all of the extra batting and backing fabric, or instead of trimming everything away, you could trim the extra batting away and use the back fabric as your binding and just do a quick, easy self-binding on this little mini quilt. I've prepared a binding for this quilt, so I'm going to go ahead and trim away all of the extra that hangs beyond the edge of the quilt. This little mini quilt does actually sew up pretty quick. I would say one afternoon you could make one of these, and once you make it the first time, I think if you wanted to make more, that you would be even faster. So there she is, ready for a binding. There's the back of my quilt. I have some threads I still need to trim away from the back. And I'm going to bring in my binding. Isn't that super cute? I used a layer cake. So I have lots of little seams in my binding, but it's kind of like a planned scrappy binding. The fabric line I've used for my mini quilt is by Moda. I'm going to put that here up on the screen so you can see. It's actually like a winter themed, but I pulled out a lot of the fabrics that don't really look sort of wintry, but still have that sort of primitive look. Very nice colorways in this fabric line, and I actually have a layer cake of the same line, and I cut my binding from the layer cake, 2.5-inch strips. So that's how I made my binding. I'm going to go bind this off camera and come back and show you my finished quilt. I do have binding videos here on my channel if you need to see how that was done. But isn't that super cute with the planned scrappy binding? And there she is. This is a perfect size quilt for those little table stands like I have. Mine is packed away in a box in a pod. So for now, I'm going to hang this on the refrigerator with some magnet clips that I got from the Dollar Tree. And the magnet is strong enough, I can hang this right on my fridge until this quilt gets packed away and comes back out at our new house. I've had a lot of fun. If you have questions about this pattern, you can comment down below. Yeah, I hope you have a lot of fun with this. And as always, I want to thank my Patreons before we close today. Thank y'all so much for helping make videos like this possible. We'll see you all really soon. Bye, everybody.